So how do we get from GPT to ChatGPT? Well, OpenAI has actually told us how they did it at a high level at least, and it turns out it involves a lot of human beings. So we start with our GPT model that's been trained by throwing a ton of text from the internet at it, right? And now we're going to train that further using human beings, where they're playing both sides of a conversation. So they're going to take some prompts, sample from a data set of prompts, and their job is to train this model how to respond to those prompts in a way that they want them to respond it to. Now, the model will suggest responses to them to make their job a little bit easier, but ultimately it's human beings that are choosing the best responses to give back to the model. Also, there was earlier training data that they leveraged from InstructGPT, which was a precursor of ChatGPT that they drew from as well. So this is basically supervised fine-tuning. We have a human being that's saying, for this given prompt, here is the ideal response to it. And we want to train you with that data, with that supervised fine-tuning. What we end up with is a trained supervised policy of what a good response is to a given prompt, and that later becomes optimized using proximal policy optimization, which we talked about. So ChatGPT's secret is that it's not really just a giant computer. It's actually built largely by supervised training from a large army of humans. It turns out they hired lots and lots of people in places like Africa, for example, to do this training for them. The next step is to create a reward model for deep reinforcement learning, which we also talked about in the context of playing video games from a computer. However, this problem isn't as simple as, did I win this game of Pong? Did I get this ball past the other paddle? So how do we know what responses are correct responses, the best responses? So again, we have human beings in the mix here. We have a prompt, and we have the model output several model outputs, several different responses. And the human labeler will then rank those different responses from best to worst. Again, this is that army of people that are being hired in whatever other countries they are for not a lot of money, by the way. These guys made like less than $2 an hour. And they are just trying to slog through all these responses that are coming out of the model, reward the ones that sound like a human being, and not reward the ones that are either harmful, or just don't sound right? In GPT-4, they're specifically using this as a stage to prevent GPT from saying toxic things or biased things or things that might be objectionable, right? So that's one way in which they sort of make sure it's well behaved as an AI. That's just coming from human beings and their judgment, right? So there's nothing magical here. It's just training from human labelers again. So at this point, we've trained it, we've fine-tuned the model using examples of what the appropriate completions are, what the appropriate responses are for a given prompt. And we've also trained it further to create this reward model for reinforcement learning, where we have this reward model that says, given these outputs, these are the best ones. So if I gave the model a prompt that says, what is Frank hiding under that hat? I might have 4 different responses here. One might be A, he's bald as a coot, which is true. B, brains, lots and lots of brains, also true. C, regrettable tattoos, it's pretty bad. No, I don't have any face tattoos. And D, what hat? That's just part of his head. So a human trainer here might then rank those responses in order of best to worst. So maybe they decided answer A is the most appropriate response, followed by B, followed by D, followed by C. And that will train the reward model that we use for further fine-tuning GPT, for ChatGPT. So we're not training GPT itself yet, we're training the reward model. So to apply that to ChatGPT, we use that supervised policy that we got from step 1, and we optimize it using the reward model from step 2. And we do that using proximal policy optimization, that same algorithm that was used how to train robots how to walk. We do this over several iterations, and now you have ChatGPT. So you might sample a prompt that's like, what is the meaning of life? We go through PPO, the policy will generate an output, maybe it's 42, which according to Douglas Adams would be the correct answer. We then check our reward model from step 2 to calculate the reward associated with that response. And that reward will update the policy using PPO. And we keep doing this over and over again until we refine things to our satisfaction. One more layer on top of it all is moderation. And that's a layer that is specifically designed to keep ChatGPT from saying anything that's sexual, hateful, violent, promotes self-harm, or could be considered harassment. So this thing was trained on the internet, and the internet is an ugly place. And despite the reward model you may have given it during the training stages, it still is pretty likely to say nasty things. So we have to have another layer on top of it to prevent it from doing that. Now, the general idea is kind of complicated. It's actually spelled out in this paper here that I'm referencing, but fundamentally, this too relies on human labelers. So again, there's a bunch of people in Africa making $2 an hour who are looking at the most toxic content that this thing produces and saying, yeah, this is toxic. That's not a good job, people. And they actually got a lot of bad press over that. They've since terminated their relationship with the company that was providing that service. But yeah, that's the human cost of this stuff. The reason that ChatGPT isn't offending you is because it offended other people who were getting paid to be offended. I'm not sure what that means from an ethical standpoint, but that's how you build an AI. So yeah, let's ask ChatGPT using GPT-4, what is Frank Kane hiding under that hat? And the moderation, I think, kicked in. It says that I'm not going to talk about Frank Kane's personal attributes. That's not a good thing. Although it does say I'm a well-respected instructor in the field of data science and machine learning. So thank you, ChatGPT. I'm flattered. But that's how you build ChatGPT. Wasn't really that complicated, right? Just in this one section, we've kind of gone from RNNs and how that built its way up to where we are today with ChatGPT. You're going to be more fun at parties now. You know how it all works. So congratulations. Let's talk about the API next and how you actually use this thing in a professional setting.